Okay. Maybe we're live. Let's see. Hey guys, I am hoping and praying that this works because I haven't used YouTube in a very long time. If you go back, you will see that I used to do webinars on here back in probably 2017. And then I switched to I've used Google Hangouts. I've used what we use for the conferences, but I wasn't sure if I would have access to that for this one. So I decided, hey, let's try YouTube and see what happens. So if you guys can see and hear me and we're good, let me know in the chat. I can see y'all typing. I see hi, Caroline. Hi, Emily. Hi, Sita. Okay, so Mark, hello, everyone. We'll see how this goes. And my assumption, based on how I think I set it up, is that this will be available after this is done to watch as a replay. So if you aren't able to stay, that's fine. You should, I think, be able to see it. Let me chat with Emily. Okay. And we should be good to go. So Emily's in the chat. Michelle is in the chat. They are kind of my right-hand women who keep me straight. So I have all the questions that were sent in previously today on Instagram that I'm going to go through, as well as some talking points. If you're like, how did I end up here and what am I doing here? We'll do a little housekeeping at the beginning. So I'm Savannah Perry. I'm a dermatology PA in Georgia. And I also have a website called the PA Platform where I talk about all these things having to do with applying to PA school, pre-PA stuff. And so I planned this webinar to specifically talk about things for reapplicants. I feel like sometimes reapplicants get, what's the right word? Brushed over. And there's not much specific for people who are reapplying. Y'all are welcome to ask any other pre-PA CASPA questions. CASPA open today. That's totally fine, but I'm going to try to focus on reapplicant stuff to make sure that you guys feel prepared. I know it is frustrating to have to reapply. It's also very common. And so that is definitely something you want to, I don't know, we can work on it. So let me get to my list. So I have questions and things. So first of all, I believe this should be available afterwards to rewatch. That technology is not always my friend, so we'll see what actually happens with that. The next webinar, because I've been doing these monthly since I guess January. The other ones, most of them are on YouTube. If they aren't up, they'll be up very soon. But the next one will be on interviews, and that will be on June 15th. That link to sign up is not set up yet, but I'll post it on Instagram tomorrow. So if you don't follow on Instagram, my Instagram is the PA Platform. And I think some people are maybe having trouble with the chat on YouTube. So there's actually a question box on Instagram in my stories that we're going to be checking throughout this session. So if you have any questions about reapplicant stuff, head to Instagram, enter your question there, and we'll add it to our list. But yeah, mark your calendar, June 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern. We're going to talk about interviews. That's my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm very excited for that one. And I didn't want to make y'all wait too long because interview invites went out really quickly last year. And I think they probably will this year as well. Okay. Let's see what else we have on my list. Okay. If you do anticipate that you are going to need a mock interview because CASPA opened today, we have our $100 CASPA mock interview special. So I'll pin that at the top. Our mock interviews are $100 from now through Sunday, and they don't expire. You can use that anytime. So if that's something that you think you're going to be interested in, that is a bigger discount and better than any of our discount codes. So you may want to look into that, or if you have any questions about it, let me know. Okay, let's get into reapplicant stuff. I'm sad I can't do my polls on here like I'm used to. So let me know in the chat if you are reapplying this year, or even if you're reapplying multiple times. And go ahead and start putting your questions in as well if you have any. See some questions coming up. Okay, so we're definitely going to talk to that. All right, so here's kind of my agenda and the categories that came in with the questions, and just so you kind of know where we're going. Number one, we're going to talk about what is a reapplicant specifically and what that means. Then we're going to talk about stuff having to do with each part of the application. So personal statements and essays, letters of recommendation, and then interviews. And so hopefully that will cover everything. But if I don't cover something, again, let me know. I'm going to try to go through things the best I can. Quick sip of water. I'm the worst at drinking water all day. So, all right. First of all, what is a reapplicant? We got to clarify some stuff. So CASPA, just keep in mind throughout this whole process that CASPA is a universal application service. It is a service. It is a middleman. They really don't make any of the rules. The programs are the ones who make the rules and actually matter. So when you go onto CASPA, whether you have today or not, totally fine if not. Please do not feel like you have to submit today. If you have entered information in the past or applied in the past, when you bring it up, it will ask you, when you sign in, the first thing that comes up is, do you want to pull this information forward? So you get to choose, starting with a blank slate, basically brand new account, brand new application, or pulling information forward, and you can choose certain sections. Also in my Instagram stories today, I showed what this looks like. So I have a CASPA account. So I actually signed in and went through that process to show you exactly what happens. It can take some time for that information to pull forward. They say, up to 24 hours. I did it this morning. It was probably around 10:30. And I just got an email about an hour ago that my application was ready. So it didn't take the full 24 hours to get that set up, but it also might depend on what all you're pulling forward and how much information you have in your account. So don't freak out if you go to work on it, you've set aside some time, and then you can't yet. That is normal. That's expected. But in doing so it clarifies in the description that you will be a CASPA reapplicant. That means if you have put in any information in your CASPA before, ever, CASPA will consider you a reapplicant. That does not matter to schools. Schools care if you have submitted an application to their program previously. So let's say that my first cycle, I applied to Emory and Mercer. And then I didn't get in. So the next cycle, I applied to Emory, Mercer, Duke, and Vanderbilt. I don't even know if they have a PA program. I don't think they do. We'll say Baylor. But then, okay, so to Emory and Mercer, I am a reapplicant. To Duke and Baylor, I am not. I'm a first-time applicant. In the grand scheme of things, that really doesn't matter. Some schools will actually give preference to reapplicants because that shows dedication to the profession and that you really want to do it. It also shows dedication to the program if you've applied there previously and that you really, really want to attend there. So that is kind of the definition of a reapplicant. A reapplicant is someone who has applied to a program previously and is reapplying to that same standards. In general, if you're applying more than once. So, okay. You'll choose what to pull. And when you choose this information to pull forward, you should be able to edit most of it, unless it was a degree that was verified with a transcript. You won't be able to edit that. And then transcripts, you may or may not be able to edit depending on whether you had more coursework or not. So all of that should be the same. Double check that everything's actually there. That's important. You never know what could happen. Again, technology is not our friend. Letters of recommendation and personal statement will not pull forward. There is no option to pull them forward. One thing you can do if for some reason you don't have your personal statement is you should be able to go in and download a PDF from your previous application cycles. And in that case, you could copy and paste it or at least look at it from there if you needed to. But you won't have any access to your letters in that PDF. You can see who your letter writers were, but you really wouldn't have access to that. So that's kind of what happens on the CASPA side of things. There's also some timing with all of this that is program dependent beyond just being a reapplicant. So some of the questions I had were, let me come down to here. Where's that one? Can I apply for schools that don't require the GRE first and submit the application? Yeah, so you will be able to submit to some programs and then add more programs later. You can add test scores, totally fine. The difference in this is like if a program does require the GRE, some of them are okay with it being in progress. Some of them want that official score on your application. So just double check before you actually submit. Okay. Let me see. We are adding all your questions to our document, so no worries. We will get to them, I promise. Okay. Let's move on to talking about personal statements, because I would say when it comes to reapplying, this is the area I get the most questions about. Number one, just being, do I need to change my personal statement? Do I need to update it? Do I need to edit it? And my opinion is yes, that if you are reapplying, you should have some updates or changes to your essays for a couple of reasons. One of the first ones being it kind of just looks lazy to not change them, because even if you think you did a really good job, something didn't work, something didn't click. And that may have been your personal statement. It may have not been your personal statement, but you can address some different things in your personal statement to try to cover that so that hopefully it wouldn't be an issue in this upcoming cycle. Okay, I now will do a reading from the personal statement, the PA school personal statement guide. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to actually read from this, but there is a section on reapplicants. There's a whole chapter on reapplicants. But one thing I wanted to just address from here, this is like my number one thing. It's backwards, y'all. I think it's backwards for y'all. But the one thing when it comes to your personal statement is your reason for wanting to be a PA will not have changed between cycles, probably. You may have a little more insight or a little more perspective. Maybe you've had some more experiences that have given you some clarity. But ultimately, those main things that have brought you to this point won't be any different. So you can still emphasize those. You might just do it in a way where you are using different examples, using different specifics, different stories to make your points, because that can help you tell your story differently. Schools can see your previous personal statements and applications. So a lot of programs may have them side by side and compare and say, okay, last year this person applied. We thought they were a good applicant. We gave them an interview, but we really felt like their volunteer work was missing. They didn't really address it in their personal statement last year. Let me see if they've done anything about that. Because when you're looking, if you're a reapplicant, you've seen an application, they're really long. They're like 25 to 35 pages long. And all of that experience kind of starts to run together. So that's where your essays are the way that you can expand and show yourself, show more about you than actually just telling on your application. Sorry for anyone that I just got that Frozen song in your head, because that's what my daughter sings all day. But yeah, so that you do want to revisit your personal statement. Same thing with supplementals. You should be able to talk about what you've done differently. I would not be concerned about sending an essay that talks about being a reapplicant to a program you're applying to the first time. That's okay. Again, some schools prefer reapplicants. It's okay for them to know your story and know that you've applied previously. The only thing in those cases would be being able to explain like why you didn't apply there the first year and why you're applying there now. So what, like, did you find out more about the program? What appealed to you? Were you just trying to stay close to home the first cycle? If that were to come up in an interview, you'd want to be able to explain it well. Okay. So things that you want to work on and do better. It can be a little difficult to figure that stuff out. So one tip I have for anyone in the position of being a reapplicant is to reach out to programs. Any program you've applied to previously, whether you were rejected, waitlisted, whatever, still waiting, ask them what you can do better. Probably 9 times out of 10, they're not going to respond, or they're going to give you a very generic response. But if you get any feedback at all, it will be extremely helpful in figuring out what parts of your application you need to tweak. So I use the example, if you've followed me for a while, Taylor is one of my best friends. She was my medical assistant at my first job for 5 years, and she is now in her clinical year of rotations, or PA school. Sorry, she's on rotations. She's coming to do a rotation with me actually starting next week, which will be really fun. But when she applied to PA school, there was a provisional school. It was kind of late in the cycle. Their deadline was March 1st. She applied in February, got in on one of their very last interview dates. And it's a program where at the interview, they actually give you feedback and tell you your status. So at hers, they told her that she needed more primary care experience because she'd only ever worked in derm, and she needed to increase her GRE score. I think she had like a 296, and they said they wanted her to have a 300 or higher. So that was really nice of them to give feedback. She was disappointed, clearly, because, I mean, you want an acceptance. But after, it took her a couple months, and then she studied for the GRE and retook it, did awesome, got like well over like a 309 or something, like a really good score. And then she started shadowing more in primary care. She sent the school an update, and she was accepted. So when schools tell you to do things to improve or work on, they really want you to do those things. Like, they're not just saying, hey, you need to take more classes, you need to increase your GPA to be mean, or because they want to waste your time. They're telling you that because they actually want to see something different or need you to prove something to make sure that you're ready for their program. So those are just things to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out what you need to work on, and what you maybe need to emphasize in your personal statement. If you get some of that feedback, make sure you're covering all of that. So the question of, do I need to rewrite my entire personal statement? It's hard to answer because there's so many different factors involved with this also. Let's say you applied and you got interviews. That's awesome. That's a big deal. It's hard to get an interview. And that means that schools read your personal statement and they liked it if they gave you interviews. So in that case, I would say you don't necessarily need to change it that much, but you'd want to make some changes to emphasize different things, show how you've matured, but you were already on the right track. Let's say you applied and you know 100% that you meet all the requirements. You're positive you met the requirements, but you didn't get any interviews. In that case, they probably did read your personal statement and it didn't work. It didn't get you interviews. So something needs to change. You need to do something different with that statement. Revisit it, get different people to edit it, get some other perspectives, other feedback, and figure out what went wrong. If you applied and then you looked back and you're like, oh, I actually did not have the grades, or my GPA came out lower than I was expecting, and I don't even think they ever read my essay. That's another case where you may not need to make as many changes. You can add in the stuff about being a reapplicant and maybe rephrase some things, rework it. But if no one ever read your essay and you're maybe even applying to a bunch of new programs, you probably don't need to make as many changes. It's a very case-by-case basis, and that just makes it more complicated. So sorry, I know that's not like super easy. One of the things I came up with in the book is basically, if you, like, let's say you're making a new recipe or baking a cake and you make it and it comes out not very good or too dry or it tastes bland, you're not going to use that recipe again. You're going to change it. So when your outcome isn't what you wanted and isn't what you expected, you need to make changes. So I hope that resonates a little bit, but y'all can let me know. Okay. Let me go back to my list and my questions. Let me ask a question here real quick. Make sure we're good. Do that. Okay, so let me go to my personal statement questions and make sure I've covered these. Okay, cool. Thank you, Emily. I just thought about that. So this question's good. How can my new personal statement best reflect my experience in the last year? Look at everything. So look at grades, GPAs, experience, whether that's hours, types of experience, settings, volunteering, same kind of stuff, shadowing, just your maturity as an applicant. Do you feel more ready now than you did before? That's important to show. Test scores, if that was an issue, and use your supplementals too. A lot of supplementals will ask specifically about reapplicants or why you want to go to a program, and you can emphasize all of these things and explain that as a reapplicant, or why you chose a program, why you applied again, what you liked about them at the interview, or your experience with them, to make sure it's clear why you want to go to that school. Someone says bullet points or paragraphs for experiences. I did paragraphs last year. Should I change it? No, I wouldn't change anything you don't have to change. Make sure that your experiences are clear, what your role was, that your experience fits in the category you put it in. I've been editing a lot of experiences, and this is something where I've run into some issues with. Somebody will say they're categorizing a role as patient care experience, and then their description only talks about doing paperwork and phone calls, which is not patient care experience. That's healthcare experience. So you want to make sure that your experiences fit where you're putting them and reflect what category you're using that for. My watch is telling me to stand up. Okay. I'm going to run through some of these. Will my clinical experience roll over? It hypothetically should if you choose to roll it over. Should I mention to my top school that I was waitlisted last year? Definitely fine for a supplemental. I wouldn't include that in your regular personal statement. That went down the wrong pipe. Sorry, guys. Okay, how can I address lack of shadowing and volunteering, but I was working the whole time? If there's still an area where you feel like you're weaker, if you've had any improvement at all emphasize that. If there are other parts of your application that you have improved, even if there are areas where you were already a little bit stronger, like experience, emphasize that too. Never point out a weakness or really even address it head on unless asked or proving a point, but you don't want to put yourself down. So like, I know I don't have a lot of shadowing and volunteering, but I was working. We're not going to do that. We're going to say, I worked diligently to get more hours and get more experience. And in that, I've learned more about communicating with patients and their families and the lessons you took away from that versus what's lacking. Can I change my healthcare experience to PCE after pulling last cycle's app? I classified it wrong last cycle. That's a CASPA specific question. I would ask them or just try it when you get in there. I don't know that you can. I don't know. I'm not sure if you can just change it or if you'd have to re-enter it under a different category and delete the original one. Address those. Once you pull your app forward, can you go to work on supplemental essays or do you need to wait? I believe once you select the schools you're interested in, you should have access to those. If the supplemental is in CASPA, some schools are not. So you always want to check the program websites, make sure there isn't a separate supplemental there. And then some schools will email a supplemental after you've applied also. Where do I enter EMT school if I can't order a transcript just as an experience? So you could enter, so usually you're not going to enter a training program unless it was done at a university or secondary institution. So like I went to CNA school training something, and it was through kind of a secondary, like a secondary place, and I didn't enter that, but I did enter my week of clinicals as patient care experience. I just didn't enter like the classroom time. So you'd want to make sure that you are kind of clarifying that specifically. Sorry, some of these are more just like CASPA specific, but they're the ones that were asked today. And then we'll get to letters of recommendation in just a second. How detailed should we make descriptions of certification or licenses? Treat it like a mini personal statement. No, those you just enter. You really don't need a description of a certification or a license. What are they looking for in the description of childhood residency box? Something really brief. I put some examples on my stories the other day, and I think they're on highlights. But, you know, for me, like lived in a single family home in a suburban setting is fine. Or rural farm area with my parents and brother. Like apartment in urban setting with extended family and immediate family. Just like very brief, like overview of kind of what your main upbringing was. That's just demographics. Don't read into it too much. I like this question. I should have addressed this at the beginning. Should I reapply to the same schools or try different ones? This is something interesting that I see sometimes, not super often, but every once in a while I'll work with someone who is reapplying but chooses to apply to all new schools the second time. And that is just not a great strategy. As I previously mentioned, some schools like reapplicants. And so there's no reason to not reapply to a program unless you figure out that you don't meet the requirements or it's not a good fit for you. If you know you wouldn't be happy going there, that's one thing, but you shouldn't necessarily be applying to all new schools every cycle. I think that would just decrease your chances in the long run. But what is a good number of schools to apply to? So this is interesting. I've always said like around 10 to 12 is good if you're wanting to cast a wide net, but that's not always the case because you do want them to be specific to you and you want to feel like it's a good fit both ways. So in that case, we can look at the PAEA data, which is the Physician Assistant Education Association, and they say that, or they've looked back at studies, the average number of programs that a student who matriculates into PA school applies to is 7. So somebody who's accepted and starts PA school on average applies to 7 programs. So that tells you if you can find 7 programs that are a good fit, it's just an average, but that probably should give you a good shot. They looked at people who apply to more programs and found after the 16th program, there was no statistical increase in chances of getting accepted to PA school. So you probably don't need to apply to more than 16. What ends up happening if you're just applying to tons and tons of programs is you run out of time and money, but you can't do all the supplementals. There's a lot involved with a lot of these supplementals. And so if you're kind of overloading yourself, what I've seen is a lot of people just give up. They just can't do all of them. And so they end up like wasting time and money because they never even complete the application. You don't want that to be you. So choose wisely, make sure they're all good fits. I was told by a few schools, so this goes back to what I was talking about getting feedback. I was told by a few schools that I was denied due to GRE recommendations. Retake it. Or I guess you could apply to schools that don't require the GRE, but they're telling you we want a better score on this test. The GRE is something you can study for and retake. So I highly recommend doing that and trying for that. To see if you can increase that score because it could be a big game changer for you. I personally don't put much weight in the GRE or think it's that helpful, but some schools need it for whatever reason. So definitely retake that and show them that you are able to do well. I mean, there is standardized testing involved in PA school, even though it's more like knowledge-based than GRE-based. But, that is something they want to make sure that you are able to do well. So if they give you feedback, you need to act on that and do something about it. And what if schools didn't give me personalized feedback? They all said due to COVID, they couldn't. That's pretty common for schools to say they couldn't or to just give you like very generic stuff. It stinks, but at least you tried. And then you just got to look at it yourself and kind of see what areas you feel like you need to get some improvement. Let me go here real quick. Okay. All right, we're about to get to chat questions. Let's go back to talking about letters of recommendation. So letters don't roll over. You'll have to ask for letters again. That's something good to do fairly early to make sure they get in on time. I don't know if anyone's had issues in the past with letters holding up their application, but that tends to be pretty common for that to be the most rate limiting factor of actually getting your application submitted. For CASPA to consider your application complete and start evaluating it, you have to have at least 2 letters submitted, and they require that you request 3. That's something else to really make sure you check program websites. Some programs will say they want specific letters and that they want them at time of submission. So let's say you requested your 3 letters, you submitted for verification, 2 of your letters came in, the third one's you're still waiting on. It goes to a program, they get it, they start evaluating it, but you don't have that professor letter yet. That's going to weed you out before they even really look at you. They might revisit that, they might not. You don't really know, but they said they wanted all the letters at time of submission. So those are things you would have to look at. So one question with evaluations is, how do I ask from the same people? I feel embarrassed. What do I do? It depends on your relationship with them. most of these people, I mean, they probably are going to understand, like, it's hard to get into grad school. It's hard to get into PA school. That doesn't mean anything about you. That doesn't mean you're not a good person or a good applicant or a good qualified future PA. It just means it's really competitive and it's really hard and it's only getting harder. So, I think I would have conversations with those people like, hey, I really tried last year, but, since then, these are some things I've done. I feel a lot more prepared this year, but I would still love for you to be one of my letter writers and share your input. Could you possibly resubmit your letter? Be gracious, be professional in asking for that. But when we're talking about letters, one thing I just want to mention is really think about who your letter writers are and just make sure that these letters are as strong as you want them to be. Ask the person, did you give me your highest recommendations? Do you feel like you can give me your highest recommendations? And consider if you should ask someone else. I recently got an email, and I think she's going to come on the podcast from someone who had to reapply, and she said one of the feedback things that one program gave her was that one of her letter writers, which was a doctor she had worked with, did not give her the highest recommendation. I think he gave her kind of like a middle rating, and the schools told her that was a concern for them. And so think about who's writing your letters and make sure that they're the best people who know you best, who can speak to you the best, who are doing that, because letters do carry a lot of weight. It's someone else's opinion about you. So schools do want to see that personal connection and really a good, strong recommendation that you're a good fit for their program. Okay. Now let's go to some chat questions. And I think we've been putting these in order, so keep putting them in the chat. Good to go. How do you go about filling out clubs under the extracurricular activities under the experience section? So as long as you have a contact information, you can put any experience there. You do have to have somebody that they could technically contact to validate your experience. But you would explain just your involvement, what you learned. I'm a big proponent of not just stating what you did, but also going into the lessons you learned and what you took away from an experience. And I think that's really important. I have some examples in the personal statement guide. If that would be helpful for me to go through those, we can. But use those as your mini personal statements and don't waste that space, but actually kind of show why things were important to you. If you're involved in an extracurricular, why were you involved with it? What meaning does it have to you? What impact did it have on you? Okay, for my patient care experience portion, is it okay to just edit and add the number of hours and keep the same description if I have not changed positions? Yes and no. So if you feel like your descriptions were strong and what they needed to be and they fit the category and explained what you wanted to do, then yeah, leave it. If you don't, if you're like, oh yeah, I kind of missed the mark there, then you'd want to edit and make sure you're on track. Let's see, reapplying. I did not submit my first application. I guess that makes me a reapplicant. So if you never submitted an application, you are not a reapplicant to programs. You are just a reapplicant to CASPA, which really doesn't matter. And they don't like you're not categorized or anything as a reapplicant. As a reapplicant applying to about the same schools, do you recommend saying being denied acceptance into PA school last round allowed me to? Or would you say over the past year I'd probably go with the second one, and I just tend to err on the side of being more positive and just saying, over the past year I gained whatever. I also think it's okay though to express disappointment and say, I was disappointed or discouraged, but let's talk about this. So if you get rejected or waitlisted or don't get any interviews, at that point you have two choices. You're going to be disappointed because that's normal. I got rejected from 2 programs instantly. Like, you're going to be disappointed, and you can either choose to let that disappointment make you consider other things and decide that you can't do PA school and get you down, or you can use that disappointment to push you forward and say, like, no, this is what I really want. What can I do differently? What do I need to change to get to where I want to be? And so that is the passion and like the decision that I want to see in your essay, that you said, no, like this, I know deep down in my bones, this is the job for me and nothing else is going to make me happy. And that's what I want you to show the programs. So you just have to be really, willing to be vulnerable and to show that in specifically your essays, but your application in general. So I would err on the side of positivity though, and say, over the past year, I've done this, I've learned this, I've matured, whatever. All right. Okay, I will graduate this is a great question. I will graduate in May, so should I wait to get the official transcript? Yes. So I have a question though, and y'all can put this in the chat if you feel comfortable, or if you don't, that's okay. So if anyone, since we're talking about reapplying and a lot of your reapplicants, is there any mistake that you made in a previous cycle that you want to tell someone, don't do that? Like, I messed up, I did that, don't do that. I think that would be helpful for y'all to share with each other. But this is one that I see a lot. So if you're graduating in May, I would say wait to get your official transcript, because if you don't, those grades from this semester, your degree, and you've already submitted, will not be verified and they'll not be included in your GPA. CASPA will only calculate and verify your GPAs once. So they'll do it the first time you submit. So if you add more transcripts, add more classes, it doesn't matter to CASPA, because they are not going to re-verify you. And that is very frustrating to people who want those on there, or schools specifically say they want you have to have a degree, or you have to have certain classes complete. They're not going to look complete, and that's going to be a problem. So, all right. I want to see what y'all are saying in the chat about this. So, I noticed I had a lot of spelling mistakes because I tried to get everything submitted quickly. Yes, that's very common. That's why, so what I recommend is, work on it, get it to the point where you feel like it's great, good to go. Take a step away, like get off the computer, don't look at it for a day or two, come back, revisit it with fresh eyes, go through everything again, and then submit. The other thing that people do, I don't know if any of y'all did this, is I've seen, this is weird to me. So people put placeholders for their hours where they'll just they're like, oh, I'll go back and change it once I get look up how many hours I had or whatever. And so they'll put in kind of random numbers. And I've seen applications come in that look like they have 500,000 hours or 26,000 hours when they really don't. And so they forgot to go back and change it. And you just want to make sure that all the information is accurate. And it's hard because there's so many different sections to look at, but definitely double check that. Yes, so CASPA doesn't re-verify. A lot of people make that mistake. Caroline made that mistake. You can reach out to schools, so you can tell them that you have things completed or all that, but they probably aren't going to reapply or redo your GPA. And then they also, some schools will accept that, some won't. Some will only go by what's in CASPA. Let's see. Okay. There does get into being some gray area. Let's say you are taking summer classes that aren't done until August. You may have to make the choice of.
Could you try again?
Serious talking. You may have to make the choice of going ahead and applying with those in progress versus waiting just to get in early. So there is kind of, you've got to weigh how strong is my application versus how much do I need this class to make those decisions for yourselves, because that could definitely be an issue if down the line, you applied too late. So that's something just to think about, and kind of you have to weigh the pros and cons there. Okay. I accidentally froze my water. Okay. I was on the accelerated track and could only apply to one school last cycle. This cycle, I'll be able to apply to more schools. Will these schools be able to view my previous application cycle? They will not. So yeah, they'll only see it if you've applied there previously. Okay. Will the school, okay, so they said that. Answered that one. Does it matter what order you enter your experiences in CASPA? Not really, but I recommend doing it chronologically, and I believe that's what they recommend too. If you haven't already done your CASPA FAQ read through for the year, definitely make sure you take the time to do that, because it's so useful and really important. Okay. If I had a medical condition that I had to deal with between last application, and now as the reason why I didn't increase my shadowing hours, weakest point of my application, how do I include that? So it kind of falls under, I wouldn't necessarily emphasize the weakest point, maybe just emphasize the stuff that you did do more so, unless you're specifically asked about that section. If I am retaking general biology for this summer course because it's becoming 10 years mark for expiring credit, should I wait until the grade gets updated? Yeah, so depending on when it is and the rest of your application, that kind of falls into trying to decide about applying early or waiting until you have the grade. Okay, this is a good timing one. I'm in the process of transitioning my patient care job to an MA, but won't officially start until after I submit my application. Should I just update my app after submitting, or is there a way to mention this? Yes. So with anything experience-wise that happens after you submit, you can't project it. Like, you can't project hours or add anything that's upcoming. Depending on what your job is now, like, you could incorporate it in experience details, maybe if it's in the same organization and you're just transitioning. But otherwise, you would update afterwards. So you could add a new experience after you started to get some hours in that role. And then I would recommend contacting the program separately too, just because a lot of times, they're getting tons of notifications about CASPA updating for thousands of applicants, and they may miss it. So give them that kind of second heads up, like, hey, just want to let you know I have started a new position and these are the hours I'm getting. Can I put online shadowing hours into CASPA? And then the next one is, how would you enter virtual shadowing in CASPA, and would you add this to a resume? So I wouldn't add it to a resume probably, unless you just added like a little bit under shadowing. You can put it on CASPA. You can put anything you want on CASPA. Like, you can put, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something like random. I don't know, bungee jumping at the mall or something. Like, you can put whatever you want. So it really doesn't, like, that's not the question you need to be asking. The question is, does it matter to the schools and will they accept it? which virtual shadowing is something that some schools will accept as shadowing, some won't. Either way, it's a great experience. It's a great way to get more perspectives and information that you probably couldn't shadow in all of those areas in real life. So you can put them into CASPA. So let's say you did virtual shadowing a lot and you have a bunch of 1 hour different experiences. I would try to group them together as much as possible. That's going to make your application very crowded and very long if you're putting them all in separately. So I think in that case, it is better to put them together. Some people are putting them under shadowing. Some people are putting them under extracurriculars. Schools are going to recategorize experience if needed to fit in different areas. So don't worry about that as much, but choose kind of where you think it fits best. And always on this and anything else, feel free to double check with programs. If something is not directly, explicitly stated on their website, reach out to them. I was actually working with an applicant earlier today, and we were looking at a specific program and things having to do with AP classes. And like on the prereqs part, it didn't really say anything about AP classes, but then on the GPA part, it said the AP classes might be accepted but didn't count towards GPAs. And so it just was not clear at all. We looked through the FAQ, we looked through everything. And so my recommendation was to reach out to that program and try to get more insights about whether her AP credits would be accepted for a prereq. How many letters do you think is best? I always have 5, but I hear a lot of schools don't like getting 5. So I say 5. If they don't like getting 5, they don't have to read all 5. So it really doesn't matter. Like it shouldn't be a big deal to them. So yeah, if you think you have 5 strong letters that are going to all be helpful to you, then go for it. Do all 5. If a school does not require the GRE, but I've taken it and got a 305, should I go ahead and send it? You can enter it into your unofficial score. I wouldn't take the time or money to send it to a program that does not request it, but what schools can do is they can choose whether they see that section. So if they want to see your score, they can still see it just unofficially. But if a school wants a GRE, they're going to ask for it. What if I cannot get a PA to write letters of rec? I only work with RNs. PAs, I only shadowed once. So I mean, it is ideal to have a PA letter. It comes down to also what your programs require. If they require a PA letter, you need a PA letter. So you need to start working on making those relationships a little bit stronger, whether that's through shadowing, mentoring, trying to work closely with PAs, doing something to where you're really kind of able to establish something and get that feedback. But yeah, so that's kind of, you have to look at each program to see what they require. Okay. Any tips on diversity essay writing? I believe that may be why I was not considered at some schools. So I guess you're maybe referring to like a supplemental about like diversity, maybe. I don't know. So I think just being able to explain your perspectives, your background, really just explain and show who you are in your supplementals is what it comes down to. I read a lot of supplementals, and a lot of them are just very general and very generic. Like they don't really tell me anything about the person. And so you got to make sure you're going back to that prompt, being very personal, and really sharing, as much as you can, using specific stories, using examples when you can as well. When is the best time to submit? I feel like I always apply too early. I wouldn't say there's a too early unless you're rushing your application. I would set a deadline for mid-May to early June. and try to shoot for that. There are things that can hold up your application, like verification time or letters. So you just want to make sure that you're building in a buffer for that. But yeah, I would say late is worse than early. Okay, should we limit how many letters of recommendation come from people of the same organization? Not necessarily if they know you in different ways or can speak to you in different ways, but having some variety, I think just gives you a little more credibility than if everybody comes from the same place. So if you can have the ones I usually recommend are a PA letter, an ND letter, a work patient care role supervisor, a professor, and some type of volunteer supervisor as well. That kind of covers everything and should meet all of the requirements for any school you would apply to. Ooh, what if I retook a prereq course and got a worse grade? Yikes, that stinks. But it happens because usually those classes are really hard. Be able to explain it. So on your supplementals, on your mock interviews, on your interviews, just make sure that you really can explain why that happened and what kind of was going on, what you learned from that situation, and how you're going to do better moving forward. Do schools like to see that you're still taking post-bac classes after applying? It depends. If that's a weakness on your application, your either grades or GPA, that can definitely be helpful to really show that you can handle a difficult or, higher course load. But if you feel like that's not your weakest point, then that might not be the best use of your time. I don't know what this is. Do you recommend the Harvard HMX program? I've never heard of that, so I guess no. I have a lower GPA. I'm currently taking classes to try and raise it. What GPA do you recommend I should be aiming for? Which that's hard. Like raising your GPA is so hard. So most programs, the minimum is a 3.0. You're going to have to hit the minimums to be considered. If you've hit the minimums, then I would really work on prereqs, anything with you want to try to have a B or higher in all prereqs, then taking recommended coursework, and then taking anything higher level science-based that you feel like will really just show your ability to succeed in PA school, which is usually just taking multiple classes at the same time. Do you guys have any suggestions on which bachelor's degree I should major in before PA school? Any major is fine. It just, as long as you have the prereq courses, you should be good to go. Do schools compare your previous application and current application side by side? Some definitely do. It just depends on the program. If a school highly recommends the PA CAT but does not require it, should I take it? So I personally consider recommendations as requirements. If you want to make yourself stand out, if you want to have the best chances, I think you should try to do as much recommended stuff as possible. The PA CAT is interesting just because it's new. And it's just interesting. So being new, schools don't really know how to use it yet. And so they're trying to figure that out. But in general, the more requirements a program has that you can meet, if you like, let's say one school has 10 requirements, another school has 5 requirements. If you can hit all those 10 requirements, you're going to have a better chance of getting accepted because it's harder to get into. It's harder to do that. So less people are going to apply. You're going to have less competition. So that's how I feel about the PA CAT. Like I almost feel like it's a strategy right now to take it because nobody knows what a good score is. Like they're still trying to figure that out. And so if you take it and do moderately well, I think that's going to be beneficial in your application cycle. I mean, I wouldn't want to take it, and it sounds really hard, but I've talked to some people who took it and they said it wasn't too bad, but it is kind of a good strategy. Is it smart to use a childhood medical condition in your personal statement that contributes a lot to why I chose to explore this career as well as my providers? Sure. I always want to know why someone's choosing medicine, why they're choosing the PA profession. Like those things are really important to me when I'm reading an essay. And so if that's part of your story and it relates to PA, then go for it. When I printed a PDF of my app, I noticed that my non-healthcare employment was listed before my patient care experience. Is that due to something I did or just how CASPA organized it? I would say I think just how CASPA organized it. I can pull one up and see though. Let's see. And they change stuff all the time. So on this one, it looks like they come up in the order that she entered them. I think maybe it has healthcare experience, leadership experience, patient care, shadowing. No, I think that may just be how it is. And then volunteer. She didn't have any non-healthcare on here. And that's just my friends that I happen to have. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody else can look at theirs and see. Does getting a withdrawal or a W affect my acceptance to PA schools?
I found this on the web.
W's are not like a withdrawal is not that big of a deal as long as you can explain it. If you have a whole bunch, you definitely need to be able to explain it. But yeah, I think that would be, a few W's are not a big deal. Definitely better than a bad grade. I'm trying to see. Okay. Do I have to resubmit my transcripts on CASPA as a reapplicant? Oh, so make sure they're there, but you should only have to do that if you have new coursework to contribute. If I want to change my experience descriptions from last cycle, should I not carry them over on CASPA and just re-input them? So from what it says, hypothetically, you should be able to edit them. So unless you want to change all of them or want to re-enter everything, I would probably pull them forward and then just edit, or at least make sure I had access to the information to re-enter correctly. But if you think it'd just be easier for you to start over, no big deal. All right, I think, let's see. We'll do these last two questions because I don't want to take y'all too long since you have to go work on your application. Just kidding. Y'all should go to bed. But we'll do these last two. I've only been working at the practice 1 month, but have prior healthcare and patient care experience. Is it too soon to ask for recommendations? Do programs want recommendations from people who've known you longer? You kind of have to feel it out. I mean, sometimes you're going to have a relationship with somebody pretty quickly where you are able to feel comfortable, and they're probably going to let you know if they don't feel comfortable giving you a letter too. So ask if you have kind of felt that out a little bit, but the worst thing that happens is somebody says no. How are past grades interpreted on CASPA by PA schools? They're not in prerequisites. They're kind of skipped over, so they don't go into your GPAs. You put them in, but they don't go into your GPAs at all. And PA schools may ask like why it was pass fail if you got a choice or something. But if it's not a prereq, it's probably not going to matter. Oh wow, now you're like really coming in with the questions. Okay, so CASPA is interesting in the whole snapshot thing, which I saw people in the pre-PA club
I don't know how to respond to that.
Siri, on Facebook talking about how you have to do snapshot this year. So you can't study for CASPA. It's like just ethics. It's just your thoughts. So I wouldn't stress too much about that. If you're a fairly reasonable person, I think you should be fine. For snapshot, I actually think that sounds kind of fun. It's like a video, like one-sided interview. You could practice by videoing yourself doing interview questions, but again, like just use that to show your personality. I think that's a great, actually, kind of, what's the word? Opportunity. So go for it. Oh, this is actually a good question. Is it considered a repeated course only if you retook it at the same institution? Yes, is the correct answer. So yeah, it is. And for study abroad, it really depends on if it's, so go read the CASPA FAQ. It explains everything about study abroad. If it's on your original transcript from here, then you don't have to do anything with the foreign school. If it's not and it's from the foreign school, you have to go through a whole foreign evaluation for that. All right, for real, last one. I've had a PA and a doctor look over my last cycle's personal statement and they both liked it. They advised me to change small things and retouch it. Does it look bad if I don't change it a lot? I wouldn't say it looks bad, but you do have to kind of go back to like seeing and thinking about how it did for you last year and whether you feel like it was effective in getting what you wanted. And then it answers the questions. Like just really be honest with yourself about all of that to make sure you're on the right track. And then go from there. So, all right. Thanks for joining me, guys. So that link for the mock interviews is still at the top, and I'll be sharing it on Instagram too. And then next month's, I think I said June before, but it's definitely May. Webinar will be on May 15th, which is a Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I think it'll be on the other place where I usually do webinars. So be on the lookout for the link for that on Instagram and in the newsletter. And good luck, guys. Feel free to, I have some question boxes still up on Instagram. So if you had questions we didn't get to, send them there. And hopefully this thing saves and you can watch it if you need to later. So, all right. Bye, guys. Have a good night.